As the dust of free agency settles, it is time to look at what the Flames are doing.
You're Locked On Flames, your daily podcast on the Calgary Flames. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to Locked On Flames. Thank you so much for sticking around. My name is Jess Belmosto, and I'm your host, joined by my partner in crime, Nick Zararis. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. So head on over to FanDuel.com/LockedOnNHL to get started. Nick, we have survived the first few days of free agency, and we're going to talk all about it and just kind of what it all means, because, you know, every team has a different objective and goal and a different approach to things, and this is the perfect time to talk about it. So before we dive into that, make sure you are subscribed to Locked On Flames wherever you get your podcasts. We're free 99 across the board and on YouTube as well, and a 5-star rating wherever you listen to us wouldn't hurt either. So we are 4 days post 1201 rush. Somehow everyone just manages to negotiate a deal in 1 minute. Nothing before.
Well, that's the beauty of it all. That's one of those things where we all just pretend and play stupid. It's one of the accepted components of this, where, well, we're not discussing specific terms. We're gauging the interest of parties coming together. That's really what it is. The thing that's fun about free agency, about trades, the draft, is everybody can kind of have an opinion on this. You don't need to watch a ton. You don't need to know what you're looking at. You can say, okay, I watched player X. I watched player X. I watched Tyler Bertuzzi play 15 games with the Bruins, and then the 50 previous games he played with Detroit. I can kind of understand what he's good at, what he's bad at. Mm-hmm. I think that's worth this amount of money. I'm not basing that on anything. This is what I think. This is one of those opportunities where the average fan can give an opinion. You know, you got those family members who get their news from Facebook who text you, okay, Team X signed player Y. What do you think about it? Because they know the details. They see, oh, they had 57 points last year, 20 goals. They know there's more to it than that. But for the most part, people can kind of gauge how they feel about a signing in a snapshot. That's the reason this type of content does so well. It's why the trades, the draft, and free agency, this is the easiest content and the most engaging content, because everybody can kind of have an opinion about this. This isn't like me talking about the Nashville Predators defensive zone breakouts in February, which is kind of this intricate, nuanced, you need to know exactly what I'm talking about. Whereas this, everybody's got an opinion on free agency, trades, and the draft. That's what makes this fun, and why I like doing these big overarching topics when I'm on the show, because it lends itself to conversation, because not everybody thinks about this stuff in the same way. And it's one of those areas where there is an opportunity to kind of share ideas and to think more than just within the scope of one team. And that's what makes these conversations interesting, is you can come at them from so many different angles.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, the Flames, the list of players going to arbitration just came out, and I don't believe I saw any Flames players on the list, which, comparison to last year, is very different. So, you know, every year is a different picture, basically. Who's coming up in free agency? Who might you want to take? Who are you going to let walk that maybe you shouldn't have let walk? But, you know, every team, like you said, they just have a different goal, because some teams are so bad that they know that they're not going to be able to contend or compete. So they're just going to try to get better. And some teams, well, they just want to get older.
So let's talk about it just real quick, the baseline steps. So you get drafted at 18, 19 years old, typically. Sometimes there are underagers, there are guys who are 17, there are overagers, guys who are 20, whatever. To reach unrestricted free agency, where you are one of those names that you see on the board on TSN at noon on the 1st of July, you need to either play 8 years in the league or reach 26 or 27 years old, whichever one happens first. So if you come in at 18 and you play right away, you can be an NHL free agent at 26. For the most part, a lot of these guys do not reach unrestricted free agency till 27 years old, and you are hamstrung. You cannot earn more than X amount of money based on your starting point. Everybody as an entry level, they start at one of the tiers. There's the 925, there's 775, and then there's one below that. But everybody starts out there, and you work your way up. For the special guys, after that first entry level contract, which is 3 years, unless you're over 21, in which case it's 2 years. So once you hit those first 3 years, if you're a really special player, like you're Jack Hughes, who signed his extension last year, you'll get your big number. But for the most part, a lot of these guys get strung along. This is their one real opportunity to cash in. And it's why you see guys go to places. Well, why would he sign there? That team isn't that good. Well, he needs to get paid. He wants to get that
money.
He wants that one contract that sets him and his kids up for the rest of their lives. That's the reason you go. That's why Alex Killorn signs with the Ducks, even though they're 2 or 3 years away from being a contender, because that's life-altering money, and he couldn't stay where he was and get a comparable amount. And that's really the key here to understanding free agency. For the most part, special talents do not reach free agency. There are exceptions. The ones I wrote down, Dougie Hamilton 2 years ago, Panarin was 4 years ago, Steven Stamkos, I believe, was 5, Sergei Bobrovsky was the same offseason as Panarin. Generally speaking, elite talent doesn't get to free agency because those are the guys teams lock up as soon as they hit after that first contract, like I was saying about a Jack Hughes, etc. You typically only see guys hit that unrestricted free agency when they can no longer be afforded to be kept by the team that has their rights at the time. That's typically the type. That's why you see so many of these middle six guys, why you see the Blake Colemans, the Bertuzzis, the Yanni Gourds, those types of guys in there, because those are luxuries. When you have a player that good who's playing on your third line, you're a pretty good hockey team. Like what I was talking about this the other day with somebody, and he's like, do you think anybody could ever assemble a roster better than the one Tampa had that went back to back? And I said, probably not, because they had Blake Coleman, Gaudreau, and Gourde all making a combined $5.5-6 million between the three of those guys. That's what Blake Coleman is worth, basically, by himself, is about $6 million. And they had the added luxury of not having Kucherov count against their books for the first season of the back-to-backs because he didn't play in the regular season. So, the second year of the back-to-back, because he got hurt in the playoffs in the first one. I want to get that right. But yeah, for the most part, you're seeing the good, not great. If you see a great player get there, that's because they wanted to leave, like Gaudreau, for example, Panarin, etc., wanting to go to a different market for whatever reason. Everybody's different. What people value, it's kind of hard to get an understanding of unless they're forward about it. So in free agency, more often than not, you are going to find useful players. You're not going to find anything that really dramatically alters your team.
No, that's going to be a once in a very blue moon situation. And like you said, it's the players that want to leave. And
get paid, one or the other, or both.
And that's okay. They have earned that right. They've abided by the CBA and their contracts, and now, I mean, I'm 27. If I could go out and earn an $11 million contract for the next 8 years, I absolutely would. I don't care if I'm living, well, maybe Winnipeg, but I don't care where I'm living. The warmer, the better, but I'm not going to be picky. Money's money.
Exactly. And the one last thing I wanted to squeeze in here, I think it's interesting. One of the first things Barry Trotz said when he became general manager of the Predators was telling his guys, worry about skill. I can find pluggy, gritty guys wherever. And I think that's really interesting because Barry has a reputation for liking those guys, for really valuing that gritty, intensive, defensive structured type of guy who might not put up a ton of counting stats. But even if someone like that can identify, hey, I can find guys with foot speed who like to throw their body around, and we can worry about puck skills because those are more important because of ultimately you need to score. I just feel that's really an interesting way to think about it that a lot of teams don't, because a lot of teams look at free agency as an opportunity to add stuff that they don't have to their team. And we're going to talk about that more coming up in a sec.
Yes, and we are going to take a quick break here to talk to you about our friends at FanDuel. Take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets, and that is up to $200. That's right, just bet $20 and you will land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend on betting everything from the money line to over under and who you think is going to hit the first home run, all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can cash out instantly, and it's simple. If I can do it, anyone can do it. There is no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. And thank you, everyone, for sticking around. We're getting to the dog days of summer, and
we're getting there.
We're crawling, and we're happy to be here talking hockey with you guys, because I mean, someone's got to do it, and why not fill our summer with something fun? So thanks for hanging around, whether first-time listener or season-long listener, doesn't matter. You're appreciated.
You're part of the conversation. That's why content is fun, because you never know who's going to be in the replies, who's going to agree and disagree. It's what makes making somebody who puts stuff out into the world interesting, is the audience.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think free agency is pretty interesting.
It's fascinating because you get a real understanding of what people think is valuable. Like, you saw concentrated efforts from different organizations to do different things. You saw the Penguins say, hey, all of our defensemen are kind of small, aside from Marcus Peterson. We need to go out and get a big defenseman because Vegas won with size, and they went out and gave Ryan Graves a pretty hefty extension. They said, we don't want to get on the goalie carousel, and that's something I think people are missing from why the Penguins were eager to lock up Tristan Jarry. Was, you got to remember, Kyle's coming from Toronto, where he's had a different goalie pretty much every year of that tenure of his time there. Whether this past year was Samsonov, last year was Jack Campbell, there was Freddie Anderson. They've gone through a lot of different guys. And while Tristan Jarry is not the most special goalie, he's at least average. He's at least semi-enticing, and he's better than having to juggle the position year after year after year, what he was already doing. And that brings me to the first point I really wanted to get to in the second segment. Was a lot of the time when you are signing guys in free agency, you are not signing them to fill an immediate need, because your roster changes so much year over year. You think about where the Flames were 2 years ago when they signed Blake Coleman versus where they are now in the role Blake Coleman plays. They're very different. You think about the role that the Rangers signed Barclay Goodrow to play versus when he first got there versus what he is now. Teams change very quickly, and the longer these deals are, frankly, because a lot of these guys are reliant on their physical traits as opposed to things like puck IQ, hands, etc. They're more reliant on speed, throwing their body around, and their physical size. Those guys don't typically age as well, so their roles are going to change over time. You think about how Lucic originally signed that contract with another organization. You think about James Neal signing that contract and getting swapped for Milan Lucic, where guys change very quickly. Teams change very quickly. So while we can have the conversation right when guys sign, like, hey, this is decent money for right now, but based on what we understand about how this type of player ages, more than likely by year 4, he's going to have to slide down in the lineup. Or on the other hand, if you're signing a restricted free agent who's 23, 24, 25 to a multi-year thing, you could say, okay, he can play his way further up the lineup into a bigger role. So that's really one of the things I like talking about in this respect, is we all think about it in the matter of the moment, because so many of these GMs are operating year to year. They are just worried about maintaining their job, saving their job, and justifying to whoever above them. And that's another part of this that free agency is. This is the easiest way to show your boss, hey, I'm doing something. I'm doing my job.
Look what I can do. And I think, you think about the Flames free agency signings last summer with Nazem Kadri. I think Tree Living right there was like, I'm worth an extension. No, well, I mean, yes, but didn't end up playing out that way. And just like rosters change, front offices change, which probably means the ultimate vision changes. And I mean, everyone's goal is to win, but are you looking to win or just get in the playoffs and make extra money?
Hope for the best. Yeah, that's the thing I'm writing about the Islanders right now, who had a very active Saturday, even though it was only retaining guys who they had last season, like Varlamov, Scott Mayfield, Pierre Engvall. They locked up Sorokin long term. The Islanders didn't really have a choice, and that's basically the theme of what I'm writing is they've already sunk so many assets in trading for these guys and signing them originally that I would have argued that trading for Bo Horvat last year in January was the wrong idea because they weren't particularly close. Bo Horvat helped. They got in the playoffs. They took Carolina to 6. But they are effectively tripling down on the group that made the conference final 2 years in a row. 2 years ago now, and saying, hey, we think this group is pretty good. Let's keep it together. Let's reinforce it with what we think they need. And that's really it. They don't really have a choice. They can't say, well, Brock Nelson has 2 years left on his deal. We could get a first-round pick and a really good prospect for him. That's just not in the calculus. And circling back to what we were just saying about, hey, look, I'm doing my job. And one of the recurring themes I always see when GMs get a job in a new place is they got to get the token signing to make their boss happy. For the Rangers, it was Chris Drury trading for Ryan Reeves. For the Leafs, it's Ryan Reeves again. It's, hey, I understand we're soft. I can make Brendan Shanahan happy by bringing this guy in because he makes the old men who watch the team and go on Facebook happy. That's the type of signing you make to justify your job and be like, I'm good at my job. We're a soft team. I'm getting the toughest guy who's still in the league on our team, which doesn't actually have anything to do with playing hockey, but it helps the narrative, which that's something free agency can do. You can change or reinforce whatever narrative. If you're a slow team and you go out and you get like an Andreas Athanasiou whose only skill is skating fast in a straight line, we got faster. That's the kind of thing I think free agency is very useful for in that respect, is adding stuff you don't have. And it's very straightforward in the defense of it. Like, hey, why are you complaining? I spent money on something we needed.
Right. And, I think that's really a good way to put it. Like, these guys, it's like when you go to the grocery store and you know that you just need like eggs, bread, milk, but then you're like, well, I know I'm running low on cheese, so I should grab the cheese, but you don't need the cheese. You don't need the cheese. And I mean, did Toronto really need Ryan Reeves for 3 years?
It's crazy. Hey, and that's one of the ones where it's purely for narratives and agenda.
Yeah.
It is purely for narratives and agenda that he is there to be good vibes for the guys on the team and to make old boomer people who are more inclined to spend money on the team happy. That is the only reason you bring in a player like Ryan Reeves at this stage of his career. He's old, and frankly, he is there for intangible things. And this is something else I always talk about on the show is the old heads love signing the guys for intangibles because they define what intangibles are, not the rest of us lay people. It's a way for the people who are in the in-group, who are still in charge at the top of these power structures, to say, well, yeah, you're not in the locker room. You don't know what value he brings. Well, he doesn't bring anything hockey-wise. So, like, does he do magic tricks? Is that why he's on the team? Does everybody in the locker room gather around Ryan Reeves' locker? Like, does him yelling the lineup before the game have any tangible impact on the outcome of the game afterwards? Exactly.
But he's there, and I feel like every team kind of has that guy, whether it's like
the Hurricanes with Martinook who's screaming in Svechnikov's face. Yeah. Every team has a vibes guy. It's just ideal if your vibes guy is useful. The Lightning got a good few runs out of Pat Maroon, and then we're like, okay, we need more cap flexibility. Pat, you got your 3 cups in a row. It's great. God bless you. Enjoy Minnesota.
Yeah, you had your fun in the sun. Now you're going to go back to brutal winters. But good for him. I don't think anyone ever expected that out of Pat Maroon. But someone's just got to be there to ride along, and it's Pat Maroon.
It's funny like that, man. That's the thing. You think about some of the random guys who've hung around. I mean, Robert Horry won like 11 NBA titles being a 7th or 8th guy in a rotation with like the Pistons and the Spurs and so many, and the Lakers, so many different teams. It's always those guys who move around who are going to have the most success for the most part, because you just get more opportunities. If you stay in the same spot for too long, a team cycles over, like we were just talking about. Teams change very quickly.
Taylor Hall, you may find yourself in this situation. Not this year, but eventually. You pass around like a little cheese tray. But coming up next, we are going to talk about the pain of free agency, because sometimes you know right off the bat where this contract is going to come back and bite you in the butt. And thank you, everyone, for hanging out with us on Locked On Flames. Make sure you are subscribed wherever you get your podcasts, and, of course, on YouTube. What's, like, one Rangers contract that you immediately think of when you're like, why did they do that?
Gaudreau. They signed a 4th-line center for 6 years at $3.6 million. $3.6 million.
6 years.
They traded for his rights so they could give him an extra year, and they gave him a limited no trade as part of that extension because they couldn't afford to give him more year. You cannot give more than a 7-year contract, and they didn't want to give him more money. It's the same thing with Trocheck. They gave him 7 years because they couldn't afford to give him more than the $5.68 million he's getting right now. And this is something I love talking about, because this is where guys who really do the work, who watch the games and pour over the data can find diamonds in the rough. Is we have access to more information than ever now. If you really want to, you can do great player evaluations with a couple of subscriptions to a few different paid websites and an ESPN Plus subscription to grind the tape. You can do player evaluations at home for $40 a month and do a really good job and do an entire content strategy around just doing scouting. I like looking at guys who meet a few thresholds. Number one, guys who play down the lineup or haven't really stuck yet. So I mean guys like Matt Phillips, for example, who got that contract offer. Somebody who hasn't really gotten a chance to stick yet or has played a really limited role. Somebody who has performed well at certain levels, whether it be junior hockey, the AHL, whatever. That's somebody, okay, he's had a track record of success at lower leagues. What works for him there that he hasn't had an opportunity with in the NHL? Is it line mates? Is it special teams? Has he not gotten an opportunity there? Does he need more ice time? Whatever it is. Right. Can you start? That's my starting point. The example I like to use from last summer was Dylan Strome, who was on a really bad Blackhawks team. But if you watch the tape and you look through his underlying numbers, stuff like zone entries in particular, that's my starting point for evaluations is zone entries and exits. Because like, even if you don't put up good counting stats, if you're on a really bad team and you're still the one guy who can gain the offensive zone with puck control, or you're good at passing to offense, if you're a defenseman, those are things that'll translate well no matter what team you're on, because those little things, those details, like we always talk about, like, you know, your offense, defense, and neutral zone, or like your bones, your muscles, and your ligaments and tendons, that kind of thing. If you're good at one of those little things, you're really good at one of those little things. What are you going to do when you have better line mates? Dylan Strome had a great year in Washington, played himself into a long-term extension. The other one I'll give you is John Merrill with the Wild a couple years ago, who signed a multi-year extension. Not a lot of money, not flashy, but the ideal defensive defenseman because he's not getting paid too much. That's where teams get into trouble, when you are paying for things that you can't either tangibly see or paying for defense. Because Erik Karlsson is unique in the sense that when he signed that contract, and we've talked about this a lot, the team was that close. The Sharks were realistically the best or the second best team of the last 15 years to not win a Stanley Cup. It's either them or the Rangers. Those are the two teams of the last 15 years, the best ones to not win the Cup once. When the Sharks traded for him, that was, okay, we got to do it. That was Doug Wilson putting all the chips he had and saying, Pavelski's 35, Jumbo's 38, Patrick Marleau, Logan Couture. All these guys are in their early or mid-30s. We got one last shot. Let's go get the best or second best defenseman in the league. And if we bust, we bust. But you can't say I didn't try. And that's the other component of this that I wanted to tie in before we get out of here is a lot of GMs are just throwing chips in the middle at free agency because
Don't do that.
Yeah. there are guys who are just trying to save their jobs one more cycle. They get to a second round of the playoffs by accident. That buys them another season.
Yeah.
That buys them another season. And when we talk about the guys I like to target, and this will be the last point before I let you jump in here, it's the guys who need to rebuild their value. Somebody who has been good in the past and then goes to either a team where they don't fit, they get injured, or they're just older and you got to sign them to one of those over 35 contracts. Those are the type of guys you want to take flyers on. 2.8 million, whatever Pierre Engvall is. I think he's like 3 million for 7 years. That's not going to kill you. Eventually, if as the cap keeps going up, $3 million isn't going to be a whole lot. But tying yourself to somebody for that long, you want flexibility. Free agency is the antithesis of flexibility for most GMs because they have to give term because they can't give value commensurate with a short-term contract.
Yeah, and I feel like, obviously there's going to be like no movement clause, there are modified trade clauses, whatever. Travis Hamonic getting like a no movement clause for 2 years is absolutely absurd to me. What are we doing? I get it. Like you have to.
It's to keep the cost down. That's what.
I don't get it. But
the NHL uses them as crutches. I was looking this up the other day. There are NBA no trade. There are like there are less than 10 players in the NBA who have a no trade clause.
I didn't even know they did no trade clauses in the NBA.
There are a handful of players who have no trade clauses. A handful. Only 10 players in the history of the NBA have ever had a full no trade clause. Not limited, full no trade. The full no trade in the history of the NBA, 10 players have had full no move clauses. And that's because the NBA has enough money where they can just throw $48 million a year at a player. And if it doesn't work, the player will be like, okay, can you trade me somewhere else? The general manager will say, yes, I can. And the trade will get done within 2 weeks because there is enough money in the system to facilitate movement. The NHL does not have enough money in that system. So these guys prioritize being able to choose where they land if they choose to accept the trade.
Oh, maybe someday.
Maybe someday.
I don't have high hopes, but I do want to see an NHL where the players have, a little bit more leverage and wiggle room because they're the ones making the money. They're the ones doing the hard work every night. So, I mean, go them. Go players unions. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on before we wrap up?
Have you taken a stab at Puck Dooku yet?
No.
Okay, that's your homework. As soon as we're done recording, pull up Puck Dooku and attempt to do today's. Today's is a little tricky. Like the Flyers are on there, the Sharks, the Coyotes. There's a few in there. There's some obvious ones that jump out, but it's a fun mental exercise. It's frankly, I enjoy it more than Wordle because I'm a sports nerd. Don't get me wrong, I write a lot, but frankly, this is a better mental exercise because I get to peel back things in my brain. Like, oh yeah, Rob Scuderi played 12 games for the Blues in 2014.
Is
stuff
it
like that.
Website or is it an app?
Yeah, it's a website. Okay. It's a website. Puck DOKU is the name of the website. It's like Immaculate Grid if you've seen that for baseball.
Yes,
It's a fun exercise for hockey fans. The hockey one is probably the best of the rest that isn't Immaculate Grid. Immaculate Grid's definitely the longest tenured one. There's a basketball one. There's a football one now. But Puck Dooku's a good mental exercise. And it's fun, frankly, to remember some guys.
Well, if you want to get in on that, Locked On Flames listeners, do that because I will be doing that as soon as I get off this call, basically. So thanks for sticking around and hanging out with us as we trudge through the off season and as we wait for the Flames to do something, whether it's actually going to move the needle or we're just going to be fed lip service. So make sure you're subscribed to Locked On Flames wherever you get your podcasts. And of course on YouTube, we are available everywhere. 5-star rating, review. Wonderful. Thank you if you do it. We appreciate you. And you can follow us on Twitter at Jess Belmosto and at Nick Zararis. And we will see you soon.